Hello people, welcome to another edition of Friday Night Knives here on A Dose of Drew, and tonight we are looking at the Ferrum Forge Zelex. This is a new flipper from Ferrum Forge, kind of a Quaken / Tonto style. Has the sort of Japanese dual grind there. You can see the line where it goes to the point. Pretty nice. Couple of things here. Let's get some empirical measurements done. All right, so we're looking at just under 3 inches. We're looking at actually just over 2.5 inches. Two thing about 2 3/4 at most, 2 5/8, somewhere between there. Excuse me. And approximately that much in sharpened edge as well. Overall length, just under 6.5 inches there. Get it lined up. Relatively small knife. The dimensions definitely keep it in the realm of the small. And on the weight, 2.93, just under 3 ounces. Do a little bit here with that. There's no milling, skeletonizing. I don't know if you can see that. I'm trying to get that maybe. Hopefully you can see that on camera. There's nothing inside there. It is all solid slabs, providing a robust basis for the small folder, but also a lot of weight to go with it. And yeah, it's kind of small. Has this little notch here. We'll get back to that. All right, and some relative measurements here. Excuse me. The Paramilitary 2, as you can see, much larger, and the Ferrum 3 lightweight, closer in size, though really it's even significantly smaller than both of them. Very, very interesting little knife this is, and it is just a blur. As you can see, it is similar. It's really tiny. This is a very, very small knife, and not just any leak, but a random leak, closer to the leak in size and in hand space. It doesn't match it in blade length, though there's some other benefits to that. All right. Excuse me. My goodness, of course I suddenly have a coughing fit as soon as I come on camera. Why not? All right, and there is a bug out. As you can see, it is much smaller, and with Civivi's own Elementum. Some good hand space in here. Blade length, not really. There is another comparison I'm going to bring up here in a little bit just to help bring it in. But first, I want to make sure and say that, yes, my Wienar is both bigger, thicker, and better shaped. So, there we go. All right. So one of the first things I want to bring out, because it's really closer to what I feel this knife is, and that is a Dragonfly 2. One, hand space is very similar. Blade length is longer. But the idea of a 3-fingered grip with a choil or a choke-up grip being necessary to fully utilize the knife is something I want to bring in here, because the other knife I want to compare this to is Ferrum Forge's own Mini Archbishop. Because, quite honestly, the design of the Zelex, to me, on an everyday carry and for an everyday use basis, falls short comparatively to the Mini Archbishop. Let me get back to that in a minute. The design of it is nice. It's very solid, kept in well. It has this Tanto style, right? Or you could say Japanese grind style, where the blade grind is different than the flats. And the flat even has this little ledge right here where you can tell the difference. There's lots of jimping, fairly decent on the edge. It is one of the worst knives I have ever got from a CD, but it's not dull. It's just quite honestly, compared to most of Eevee's or anything else I've got, it's one, this paper might be a little bit wet. It looks like I'm having trouble with it, but well, let's see how much of it's the paper. And some of it's definitely the paper. Okay. It cuts. It is not the best edge I've ever had from a We-Made knife. I'm not going to lie. Again, it's D2. That's the factory edge. The 9CR18 on this is even better. The design is pretty nice, but one of the things that I will say is it's heavy. It's not much different in size overall than the Mini Archbishop. In fact, it's almost exactly the same size. But one of the first things I'll tell you, just from the raw mass, it's more than ½ an ounce heavier. Just from raw space, the handle mass, the metal, everything that's in there, ½ an ounce. There's no milling or anything to skeletonize this little sucker either. It's chunk out of the blade and just having a smaller handle. Right? So there's that. I do like the aesthetics of it. For me, the Tantoed isn't really all that cool. The Japanese style does it. But for some people it is. And the cleanliness of this design, where you have almost nothing on the pot clip, and there it's just the pivot and one screw. The blade is almost completely tucked in Quaken style. And just a little bit of a flipper tab. Very, very clean, elegant. But that's it. There's a too small a choil. It looks like a bigger knife that was just reduced in size. It's like I put it in the copy machine and said, give it to me at 75%. Instead of something like the Mini Archbishop already in Ferrum Forge's lineup that has a full-size finger choil. They know you're going to put 3 fingers on it. It's designed to be a smaller knife that fits a regular hand. And quite honestly, this just looks like they reduced a knife in size. And with all of the associated difficulties. The action is pretty good as long as you only do they have a little notch to make sure you do it, but it works. You know, the aesthetics are good, but the mechanics, as long as you do it just right, it is. The choil is a little bit small. You can, in a pinch grip, you can get it, but it tries to do a 3.5 finger grip, and so I'm forced to be off. Or you have enough to do like the scoring, but if that's the case, you should flip this blade over, because the whole sheep's foot idea will do that better. You'll have a better point for it. You may not have the chisel action, and you can take some of this backspacer off because the tip goes only to right there, which is pretty much symmetrical, so it could go to right there. You could just gotta mess with the backspacer a little bit. There's no screws or anything in the way. So the mechanics of it are okay. It's a little bit, it's predictable and it's consistent, and it's not drop shut, but it's consistent in its hydraulic action. But my problem is that if you don't get that flip just right, if you try and push button, or even if you try and light switch it without getting a full flip where that notch is there for a reason, because it's just about the only place you can get good action from it. So the mechanics aren't really that great for me. It's not bad. It definitely seems like it's made for that one, but the detent is light for anything else, and it tends to kind of fall apart when you try and, or fail, when you try and do anything else, even just a little bit off. It's, as opposed to something like the Mini Archbishop, which is actually quite hard to fail. I have to intentionally do so with a light push button. If I even move it along just a little bit, it actuates and engages. So Ferrum Forge's own Mini Archbishop has better action. A smaller, lighter blade and better action. So the mechanics kind of fall a little flat for me on this one. And the noteworthy points, well, honestly, It's a Ferrum Forge design made by we in a Tanto shape. And it's clean. It's almost like a mini Quake and Ferrum Forge style. That's it. That's the noteworthy point. It's a small EDC knife. And so far for me, it doesn't even live up to the mini Archbishop. And that makes me wonder about its intended purpose. It's definitely supposed to be like a fifth pocket or a small EDC type blade that you can carry relatively inconspicuously, but there's no milling to make it light. There's not a better choil, so I can get really good control out of a small knife. The only way I can get good control is if I have 3 fingers on it and then my hand's up here. So I'm really only using the tip anyway, and this is kind of almost a useless flat spot of blade that is often, quite honestly, on most knives. Right here is about where I use it the most when I'm opening packages or boxes or something, is right about here. So it kind of falls short for me on most of my... It'll open up envelopes. You know, it is a plastic piercer, a saran wrap slicer. Cardboard carver, it'll do it. You know, I honestly... Envelope eviscerator, not necessarily an extraordinaire, but it'll do it on the upside down pretty well. That's one great feature about the Tanto or a good quick drop point. It does open up envelopes quite nicely. There's just really not a lot of other noteworthy points for this knife. It's a Ferrum Forge. If this was another brand, I would be even more so. I usually actually don't like to do bad reviews, but this is a Ferrum Forge, a brand I am normally very happy with. And we, a manufacturer that has yet, I mean, there are manufacturers. I have sent a couple Wii knives back and gotten a new example that was perfect, that was nearly perfect, but Wii usually does outstanding jobs. They do an outstanding job executing this. There's not really any manufacturing defects. It does quite honestly all seem to be about design. I could be wrong. It could be the detent isn't done right on this, and this is one that should probably go back. But my experience on this is the detent kind of sucks. Not enough to not work. As you can see, it works. But there's almost a double clutch because of where there's the breakover point. So I only have that much, there's only that much room. My thumb has to be below that for it to go down. It's kind of hard to figure this one out. It's a decent EDC, but well, that brings me to the intended purpose a little bit. It's obviously an EDC, but here's my problem with it. If I have this knife in my collection and I have multiple knives and I have anything that's even slightly in the same, think of this as a 14C28, and that's in relatively the same cost bracket, the sheer number of options I have that are better than this knife, including Ferrum Forge's own mini Archbishop, are pretty significant. Okay? There's a massive competition in this price range. And nearly all of them are better. Pretty much every single one of them are better than the Zelex at least one thing. If nothing else, like the Lander, it's just a better general knife. It's a better basic EDC knife, and the ability to customize it with the support and everything around it is pretty significant. Something that the Zelex doesn't really have. It doesn't have that going for it. And so as a general EDC knife, it works. I will say this. If this is your aesthetic, if you look at this and go, this just looks so much better than the mini Arch. This just looks so much more like a knife I'd rather have in my pocket, so I'd rather buy. You're not going to be disappointed with the execution of this knife. It's a good knife. The steel seems to be well heat treated. The factory edge on this one, I have seen far better factory edges from a Civivi or a Wii made knife, but it's not bad. It's definitely usable, right? It's a workable edge. It's D2, and it's something that can be sharpened. If you have something like a Work Sharp Precision Elite, the first one, the relatively cheaper one, it'll sit. There's plenty of room for it to work in there. You have no problem. This is a knife that can be sharpened several ways. And again, if this aesthetic just speaks to you, you won't be disappointed. It is well made. But for me, when I'm comparing them, it's not as good. It's just not as good. And that brings me to the cost to value ratio. It's in a highly competitive, it's in that 50 to 60 something dollar mark. And that's everything. When you have things like Vosteed, Kaiser, Civivi itself, and everyone else, even Ferrum Forge's own mini Archbishop, which in my opinion is a better small knife, are all vying for your dollars in this, those would be better purchases first, which really makes this hard. So one of the first things first is there's not a lot of argument for this to be your one and only EDC knife, to be your one knife to rule them all. Unless this is going to be your first knife and you're like, I want that Japanese style, I want that Tanto grind, I want the katana grind with the tip, right? There's not a lot of argument to have this as your solo knife. As the only one you buy. There's a lot better knives out on the market. And then the problem with that on the intended purpose and as part of the cost of value, if you have multiple knives, the finickiness of the deployment, instead of being fidgety, it's finicky. And I'm adjusting to the knife instead of the knife just fitting me. And that makes it really hard to justify having in a collection because I'll never wear it. This is a knife I'll never put in my pocket. If I have to look and I have these things all sitting around, I'll carry one of these knives twice and leave this in on a 5-day rotation. It just won't be there. There's no reason to. I would rather carry the mini Archbishop twice than carry the Zelex once. And that's really the problem I have with it. It's a good knife. I expected it to be well put together, right? The cost to value ratio isn't high. It's not a high cost, but the value is basic. It is one of the more basic knives. It is actually the kind of action. If this didn't have the Ferrum Forge logo and someone hand this to me, I would think this would be one of the cheesier, cheaper knives like off Amazon or something. That just the no-name brands that are trying to get a foothold by putting something out there. That's really what this feels like. And that's really too bad because I am a fan of Ferrum Forge. There is the regular Archbishop in the frame lock is one that I would love to get. They have several knives. I have a Stinger. There's obviously I have a mini Archbishop. I'm a fan of their work, their designs, and everything like that. This one just seems to fall flat. And that's kind of where I want to go in the expectations. I expected it to be a decent EDC knife. It is a decent enough EDC knife. You know, it will do with cutting, scoring, and all that stuff. It's just not great. And that makes its value not high. It will do the job, but there's so many other ones that will do it as well as provide added value, which means this one, in a comparative sense, has lower value. It's not a bad knife, just in the comparative sense, this sits lower in the value range. And I expect it to be a good EDC, but really my request is make this one instead of 75%, give me one at 100%. Give me one that is a little bit bigger with a full-size choil. Right? If you can extend the choil out that much, extend the blade. Give me something that's got a full 4 fingers here. Give it to me more in the size range of the Stinger instead of the mini Archbishop, where this choil can be enlarged to really fit a human finger that isn't the pinky. Where the best grip isn't a reverse grip that now I have to like cut every package like I'm trying to, stab it. That's what this probably needs. Give me some lightning in there so I have at least some holes. If you're not going to do like some actual like bracing or whatever, just, drill some holes so there's some lightness. Get that ½ ounce out of there and make it bigger, right? So if you're going to keep it where it's not, it's almost at 3 ounces, and give me 3 inches. Make some holes in there so you take that ½ ounce back and then add it back in size. And now I've got a 3 ounce, 3 inch blade. This knife needs to be bigger. That's really my request. How could this be better? One, get the detent right. Okay. Another one is you could flip this blade over with a similar design and get me a really gnarly sheep's foot. That would be awesome to see. And be a great EDC knife. So if you're going to do something like this in the small, give it to me in a flipped over sheep's foot, or give me a larger one and give me both options. Change the back spacer a little bit so you can do both options. And this would be my request. As it sits, this one falls short for me, you guys. I have a hard time trying to find a good reason to recommend this as an only knife, or in the very, very competitive marketplace in the $50, $60, $70 range to recommend this to a collection. If you have all the other knives, which is, I mean, if you're spending that much money on cheaper knives, you're probably on YouTube reviewing them. Number one. But if you already have all the other knives, then yeah. But it's really hard or very non-compelling to say this should be a knife you have in your collection. There's just not a lot of reason to. Unless you are unless there's a subjective or personal reason where this design language speaks to you and you're like, no, that's what I think a knife should look like. To me, I'll put up with it, or I'm okay with this finicky instead of fidgety action. You know, I'm okay with that stuff. And so I want this. This is going to be a passion buy, not a practical one. And that's really where I'm going to give it 3 stars. It's a well-executed design. It's mechanically, it works just fine. The steel seems to be well heat treated. The grind lines are all good. It's even. I mean, it's a well-executed design. It's built well. I don't think you're going, it's pretty, I mean, that's pretty well centered. I've been flipping it. I could probably push it just a little bit to get a tiny bit more centered. And after a couple of weeks of use, I haven't adjusted it either. So that's how much it has came out of center after a couple of weeks of use. And I could probably get go in there, clean it out and all that sort of stuff. But that's just it. It's finicky. It's got a finicky action that requires you, the user, to adjust to it a little bit. Does it make you feel better? It might you. You might be like, no, that's me and my knife. We are totally like intimate now. We have figured out these little idiosyncrasies of one another, and that makes me feel closer to my knife. More power to you. I don't want a knife I have to adjust that much to. I want a knife that fits in my hand without me having to figure out what someone intended for me to do with what I bought. That's great if they're making it for them, but if someone's making a knife for me to buy, it should be a knife that fits me, not a knife I have to fit too. And that's really where I sit with this. It falls flat for me. It's a good design. They didn't do bad. It's not a bad knife. It will do all those knifey things you need it to. There's just not a lot of compelling reason to buy it. For me, there's just, I mean, I can think of at least a couple knives that are in a similar price range that aren't even Ferrum Forge, or quite honestly, I would recommend Ferrum Forge's own Mini Archbishop over this one. It's lighter. It has the same clip. The 9CR18 may not have the same edge retention as the D2, but you get a lot more use out of it. And you can get a full grip, so you have very good control for all of your EDC, and it still has a really good reverse grip. Everything the Zelex can do, the Mini Archbishop can do better, except for the chisel part. If you want to try and chisel something, that's a whole different story. But yeah, I can even score stuff. It's got enough of a belly that it keeps my hand off. So for me, this is a 3-star knife. I recommend it if the styling and the aesthetics speak to you, and it really is just something that, and there's a very, very real piece to that. It's just why we pick some knives over others, right? Absolutely. And so if it is a styling that you like and it speaks to you and you're like, that's just something I like, you won't be disappointed by the build quality of the knife. But there's not a lot of compelling reasons, in my opinion, to purchase this knife unless that is true. Everything else just falls flat on a practical reason, and there's so many other options to buy that do its job better. It makes it hard for me to recommend it. So I'm not going to. It's a good knife. It's not going to disappoint you if you buy it, but it's hard for me to recommend you to spend your hard-earned money on this when there's so many better examples and better utility options out there in this price range. So I'm not going to. And I'm going to end it on that note. It's going to be a little bit short. You might be surprised, but I really wanted to do this review on a company and build quality that I normally like on a knife that I found to be not that compelling and really just kind of fall. It doesn't make me feel bad about Ferrum Forge. They did a good job. This design just doesn't work for me. And I don't know if it will for other people. To me, it's a subjective thing. It's a knife that's really about how it looks rather than how it works. And that there's something to be said for that too. Like sometimes that's just what you want to buy the knife for. But for a cheap EDC utilitarian, I want to get bang for the buck. I'm going for the low cost market. I think it falls short. And that's where it is. 3 stars. Not recommended. Good build quality. You won't be disappointed if you do buy it. But I just don't have any compelling reasons to recommend someone to buy this knife. So we're going to leave it there. So I hope that works for you guys. You guys go ahead, take this video, watch it twice, comment as much as you like. Be mindful of side effects. Remember to like and subscribe. This has been your weekly dose of Drew. I am said Drew, and you guys have a great rest of your night.